In this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about making tile miters. This is a pretty advanced technique for tile installers, so if you're a DIY person, you can try this, but if you're not a person who is like highly conscientious of detail and someone who's very mechanically inclined, used to working with tools, this is going to be tricky for you, but I'll tell you what I know and you can give it a shot. So I like to cut them freehand with my grinder. That's a 4-inch grinder with a diamond cutoff wheel. It's what we call a turbo blade, a turbo diamond grinder blade. It's pretty critical that you have a really good blade for cutting miters by hand like this. A lot of guys have blades that, there's a whole universe of blades out there. And if you have a diamond grinder blade that's like bouncing all over the tile, it's not going to cut it for making miters. All right. This is a blade by Calidad. Shout out Calidad Tools. They make very high quality turbo grinder blades. So get you a 4-inch, 4.5-inch, some guys even like a 5-inch. I prefer a 4-inch. Also what you need is these buffing pads. A 200 grit and a 50 grit is what I use the most. A 50 grit is for removing extra meat off of the back of the tile if you need to. The 200 grit is just for polishing up the very front edge of that miter so that your reveal is nice and straight. So you can see that's what I'm doing right here. Notice I leave maybe a 1/16 or less of the factory edge, the vertical factory side, meaning I don't bring that miter all the way out into the glaze. If you try and do that, it's just going to bust through the glaze on the face of the tile. So I cut it with the grinder to get the initial 45, then I hit it with the buffer to make sure that that reveal is very clean, very even. That way when you bring the two miters together, it looks crisp. See right there, that maybe a 1/16 of meat is what I left on that tile there. See the reveals nice and clean, nice and crisp. The other thing, notice the type of tile this is. It's what is called a rectified tile, which means it was cut initially and then the sides were polished so that there's no what they call a pillow, right? These tiles are like 99% the same size. You can't really do good miters with tiles that have a pillow on the side of them or a non-rectified tile. So that's a pretty technical term, but just remember that to do miters you need most of the time a rectified tile. You can get away with doing miters with pillowed edge tiles if you use factory edges as the miter. Alright, so on the wet saw there you saw I could only push that miter so far through before it hit that arm on the DeWalt saw. Bigger wet saws, you can push wider tiles all the way through to make your miter that way. It works well. Most of the time I'm just constrained. My cuts are too wide to push them through the wet saw all the way, so I just do them by hand. Notice also I'm using my left hand, and I'm ambidextrous, so I don't want to say an unfair advantage because I've deliberately trained myself over the years to be ambidextrous in a number of things. But the reason why I like using my left hand when I'm making my miters is the blade spins down and away from me. So it's throwing all the chips and all the dust away from my face. I don't like using a guard, and I know that's a hot take on it, but I just don't. I've been tiling for 17 years, and I've never used a guard. I will say though that grinders are not exactly safe tools. If those blades misbehave, they chip or blow up, metal shrapnel's flying everywhere. So in general, guard or not, it's not a good idea to have that blade pointing directly at your face. You always want to be off to the side some, so that with a guard or without a guard, debris that's flying is not flying directly at your eyeballs. And then if something ever happens to your blade, lights out if you get hit in the eye with a chunk of a metal blade like that. Those things spin at like 10, 11, 12,000 RPM. So metal coming off of those is very much like little projectiles. Alright, so there's what those look like there. So notice that's a narrower cut. So this one I can push through the wet saw. Now, if you're going to push miters through a wet saw, a couple things to be aware of. You need a saw like this DeWalt 24000 that the head tilts, and you also want to be able to tilt it past 45. Don't make 45s right, or miters right at 45. You need that extra wiggle, right, to be able to bring those together tight. More often than not, if you make them exact 45, then material on the kind of the back side of the tile, it can come together too soon and cause the reveal at the front where you want the miter to be nice and tight. It can, make it gap more than you want. So I overclock them, if you will. Take more than 45 off. That way, right here when you see me polish this, I can bring that front edge nice and tight and get a real clean, tight miter. You don't want your miters to be touching on the front side. As a rule of thumb in tile, you never want direct porcelain on porcelain contact. You always need a gap there to fit some grout, epoxy, or silicone in there. Alright, looking down that, look at the reveal. Very crisp, very clean. If your miters don't look like that, then they're not going to look good. Alright, the other thing is that was a cut. It wasn't a factory edge that I just mitered there. So not only did I have to polish the back side of it after I removed the material, I also need to polish the face. Right here, with the wet saw cut, you got to polish that as well. And put just an ever so slight micro bevel on that so that it matches the factory cut. The trick with miters really is just practice and developing your eye for it. You have to pay attention to detail. It has to be crisp, it has to be clean, no chips. This is a really good angle of that blade. See how it's throwing the dust out and away from my face. And I don't know. I mean, some guys like to push the grinders, some like to pull them. I like to pull it toward me with the blade spinning away from me. But the grinder is just one of those tools that you really should get good at using it, pushing, pulling toward you and away from you. Right, so you got 4 variations there, 2 variations with your left hand, actually 8 variations. Your left hand can go forward or back, and the blade can be toward you or away from you. Your right hand can be forward or back, blade toward you or away from you. So that's how I do it. See the wobbles there? Straighten those up with the buffer, nice and clean. Here's what it looks like all said and done. I mean, you just gotta practice. You gotta give it a shot. You gotta try. The first ones you do are probably gonna be pretty crappy. Just keep doing it. Alright, thanks for tuning in. Subscribe if you're not.